Hello and welcome to another episode of Spark Talk. I'm your host Mansa, and today I'm joined by Comrades Alexis and Sacramento from Ligue Trotskyste de France. Hello, comrades.
Hello. Hello.
Hello, welcome. So, lots has been happening in France. The government has fallen yet again, and there have been large protests and demonstrations with some groups on the left calling for general strikes or something of the sort. Now, you recently wrote an article on this issue, which I'll ask you in a second to tell us what the name is, because I don't fully understand the name. But controversially, in that article, you say that it would be counterproductive at this moment to agitate for a general strike. I think for an average leftist, this might be a bit confusing, or they might disagree with it. So I think in this episode, I would like to have a broader discussion about the situation and what's going on to understand why exactly this would be counterproductive. But I think in order to do this, if you could start by explaining what is the governmental crisis, what's at the source of it. What is Macron's problem? What about Le Pen, who in recent months and even the past couple of years, she's been growing? What happened to the New Popular Front? The left really had its hopes in the Popular Front. All of these things help our listeners make sense of the situation in France.
Yeah. Well, in general, it's the situation is pretty negative. That's way to see it, and the government fell because it has to carry out very massive attacks against the working class. There's a big budget crisis, and the government has no majority. And who is taking advantage of this is the far right. It's not the workers' movement at this point. So the situation is not good at all. And I think that's the framework that we have to look at this point.
So, if I could just clarify, in France, why is it? So, I mean, I know France has a very peculiar governmental structure, but if the government can't pass a budget, it collapses. Is that it?
Yes, if it depends. I mean, the parliamentary mechanisms, there are various things, but you cannot, if there's no government to vote a budget, the budget has to be voted before the end of the year. And at this point, the Macronites, they got elected last year thanks to a Republican front of the left, and the Melenchonites and everybody together against Le Pen. And of course, who took advantage of this was Macron to have a new lease on life for another year. They managed to pass a budget last year thanks to centrally to the abstention of the SP. And this time, if the SP does it again, the budget is going to be so savage that against the workers that it's basically a harakiri for the SP.
I see. So is Macron pretty unpopular then?
Yes, very much. That's for sure.
I just heard on TV last night. He's the most unpopular president of the Fifth Republic. He has beaten even François Hollande.
Oh wow, okay, that's quite something. Speaking of Macron, another thing just to help us understand. I mean, me too. I'm quite ignorant about France and French politics, but so the government falls, but Macron stays. Why is Macron not being kicked out?
Well, because the real power of the executive is it's a bit complicated, but it stays with the president. But the president needs a majority, and historically the Fifth Republic was done so that the parliament would necessarily follow the president. But the liberal center that was elected with Macron in 2017, basically this liberal center has been shrinking a little bit to the left and a big bit to the right, so that the basis for Macron keeps shrinking, and he does not have a majority in parliament, so he cannot vote a budget. The situation is stuck. It's quite possible that Macron has the power to dissolve the parliament. He did that last year. And now it appears that he claimed he wanted to do this to cast off the danger of Le Pen. Obviously, the opposites happened. The Le Penites increased a lot their numbers in parliament. And it's also quite possible that, in fact, Macron wanted to put Le Pen in power, and because the left really fought for the Republican front, they managed to save Macron against himself, kind of, because Macron thought, let's put Le Pen for 2 years in government, and they're supposedly going to get discredited, and the liberal center will be back in power for after the presidential elections of 2027. But that's not the way things are going to happen, it seems, at this point.
Mm-hmm. Can I just ask a point of clarification again? What is the Republican Front? Because that is quite crucial to actually unlocking a lot of the problems of the French left and French politics in general. Could you explain what that is?
Yeah, well, that's been governing much of the French left politics for about 40 years. And it's basically national unity against the far right, which means all the major left parties unite, and including voting for right-wing liberal parties, as long as they are not with the Le Penite far right. So it's a kind of a mega popular front of everybody against the Le Penites, which means that basically the workers' movement through its organizations is totally subordinated to the bourgeoisie.
Okay, interesting. So coming to what's been happening since the collapse of the government, there's been large protests. Help us to make sense of what this is, because every time a movement erupts in France, the left internationally goes crazy because, of course, it looks very intense and sometimes very impressive. So what's the reality of these protests? What do they represent? Is the working class out and mobilized? What's the situation?
Well, it started over the summer. Somebody issued a call to block everything. So that got everybody very enthusiastic. And immediately, like part of the far left, the Revolution Permanente, which is linked to the to Left Voice.
First, it was Melenchon.
Yeah. First Melenchon. Yeah, that's true.
In August.
Yeah.
The call to block everything?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so the far left was over the moon with this, and everybody started believing that general strike was imminently on the agenda, basically. And because of course it struck a chord among many workers, because Sacramento said everybody hates the government, everybody wants to say fuck you to the government. So that was kind of seen as an opportunity for a one-day show of what people think of this, and everybody's fed up and everybody hates the government and so on. But that has been totally misread by a big chunk of the left, which has seen this as proof that time is ripe for a counteroffensive of the workers' movement. Which we think is a total misreading of the general dynamics of the situation.
In order to understand, I think, the dynamics, it's important to take into consideration that the workers' movement and the left more generally and minorities have been taken big blows, one bit after the other. And most importantly, over the struggle over pensions.
Yeah. That was 2 years ago.
Yeah, that was 2 years ago. It was a huge movement and it was a huge defeat. Then it was the what you call it in English, the
riot or the
riot.
In the banlieues.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
The struggles in the banlieue, yeah.
They were smashed and the left didn't do anything. And since there's been a few struggles in the workers' sectors that were the most militant, the most active, the avant-garde, especially the railroad workers. And they had a strike. The call was for an unlimited strike in December. That lasted one day, and even that one day it was very weak. Then they had another strike in May, divided by the different unions. One union would scab on the other, etc.
And different days and different sections of the rail workers on different days.
And that was a catastrophe. And then there was all these so-called general assemblies for the 10th of September in order to block the economy. But the reality it was that this general assemblies, it was just youth and petty bourgeois people who support Melenchon. Of course, there were some workers, but this was not the workers' movement mobilizing for the 10th of September, obviously.
I see. There's a lot in what you said that I think is helpful to painting the picture of understanding the situation in France today. So there have been these series of defeats in the last number of years. So you have a situation where there's defeats and presumably a degree of demoralization in the workers' movement. Yet you also have these sort of bursts of protests. So who composes these protests? Like, who's part of these protests, and what? Like, is there a gap between whoever's in the protests and the trade union movement? Help us make sense of this.
Yeah, certainly. In fact, we did notice there were three days of action, as they call them here, which were called by the unions on the 10th and the 18th of September, and again, most recently, 2 days ago. So they were called by the unions, especially the last two ones, but in reality, the union contingents were very, very weak. So the demos were like not insignificant, particularly on the 18th of September. There were more than 50,000 protesters in Paris, for example. But it was mostly individuals or small groups of workers or friends who came together to demonstrate, but they were not organized contingents of demonstrators, like of unionists, you know. So it had like a more liberal petty bourgeois character than a show of strength at all by the workers' movement. At least in Paris, we did not have a chance to cover demos outside Paris, so that also can mitigate what I say, but I think the broad picture is correct.
I see. And then the other question I have is, at the start you mentioned that, Macron is hated, and really the far right is really who has gained from this shrinking center, the liberal center. So then is it also correct to say that coupled with the defeats at the recent struggles, that workers are moving to the right, and then there's this growing gap between the working class and the more petty bourgeois elements, students, etc., who are in the protest?
Yes, well, at this point, we don't have what can be seen in Britain, like with these mass mobilizations against immigrants or anything like that. And so maybe it's more like passivity and demoralization.
I see.
At this point, also like in various opinion polls, it appears that over half of the working class abstain in elections. Among those who vote, half of them vote for Le Pen. And half of the other ones, so that's about a quarter, vote for the Melenchonites, and then the splintering among other parties. So that's very, very negative. So.
Yes. This brings me to my next question, which is, I forgot to raise this at the start, that Melenchon, Jean-Luc Melenchon, is also a very key figure to understand, I think, French politics. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm overstating the significance. But who is this? The LFI is his party. Could you explain, what is Melenchon's political program? Why does he have the appeal that he does? What's the place of the LFI in the French political landscape at the moment? I think to really make sense of the whole situation, we must talk about Melenchon.
Well, he started out as an SP leader. He was a senator for many decades, I think for 20 years or something like that. And then he split in about 15, a little bit more than 15 years ago from the Socialist Party. And he started moving towards like left populism. That was quite a new phenomenon in France, I think. In any case, in the last 10 years or so, he's become like the voice for the left liberal petit bourgeois on the one hand, including with a lot of radical eco-socialist talk. And so that's for the white petit bourgeoisie of the urban centers, but also he's gotten a lot of appeal, like in the working class, because, for example, during the pension fight that Sacramento referred to like 2 years ago, he openly advocated a slogan to block everything on one of the days of actions or of action organized by the union bureaucracy. So he can talk quite radical. That's what, as a real Trotskyist, we have to take up and demolish his left credentials. Similarly, in the Palestine demos, for example, he has taken a quite strong position. I mean, it's doesn't mean very much, but he's been quite vocal to support Palestine. When, if you compare with the major like parties of the working class, the SP and CP, whatever is left of them, the SP openly supports like Israel, the CP basically too. When Macron went on a big campaign against the pro-Palestine movement, treating them as all anti-Semites, basically including the Melenchonites, the SP and CP totally capitulated to that. So in that framework, it makes Melenchon look a lot better than anybody else. And that's how he gets all this credit. And in the like minority neighborhoods, if people are interested at all in politics, there's only one name for them. That's Mélenchon, basically.
I see.
Yeah, if I can just add, for example,
please.
in November 2023, this October, Macron called a demo against anti-Semitism. And everybody, that even caused a split within La France Insoumise, because everybody capitulated. The PC, the Socialist Party, a few leaders of La France Insoumise were there, but Mélenchon denounced it correctly as the meeting of those who support genocide. On one hand, this is the kind of things that make him very radical, and that are making the change the nature of the Republican front. It is no longer so much against the far right, but against Mélenchon.
Mélenchon is the anti-Semite, supposedly, and Le Pen, who's traditionally, these guys come from like French Algeria, and the Vichy regime, the literally pro-Nazi regime, that's their origin. But now they are part of the Republican front against Mélenchon. Pretty grotesque.
Yeah, that is quite a mess. I mean, that is something that he has drawn that explicit line against the French bourgeoisie on the question of anti-Semitism, which, in so many of the countries of the West, the leaders of the social democracy and the workers' movement, they refuse. In Britain, we have this where Jeremy Corbyn refuses to draw that line on the question of anti-Semitism. So that's quite something. But Alexis, when you say, we have to demolish his left credentials, like, it seems to me like, okay, he took a very good and principled stance on Palestine. The oppressed minority youth in the banlieues, they look to him.
Yeah.
So what is the problem with Melenchon? In broad strokes, I guess.
Well, yeah, the problem is that he's a bourgeois Republican at bottom, so his politics is to administer like French capitalism, and so that's how when they even like his some of his democratic demands or whatever, to achieve them basically means a confrontation with the French bourgeoisie, and he's not going to carry it out. He cannot carry this out, and so we have to prove to his followers that basically he cannot deliver. He has one foot in the camp of the bourgeoisie, one foot in the camp of the oppressed and the workers. So he's not going to go anywhere with this.
In regards to Palestine, all his program is simply to rely on the United Nations.
France must intervene. It has a glorious past in the Middle East. It's really grotesque, in fact. But,
okay.
So
France does not have a glorious past. Right. It's a very wretched past.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
No.
Uh-huh.
And when he calls to block the economy and all that, it's in the framework of what is permitted by the bourgeoisie, by bourgeois law, under the leadership of the trade union bureaucracy. Mm-hmm. So he knows, as well as the bourgeoisie, that that's not going to happen. It's like that he paralyzes every struggle. He contributes to paralyze every struggle together with the trade union bureaucracy.
Okay, interesting. I think we'll come back to Melenchon once we've sort of got the big picture. So tell us about what's happening with Le Pen these days. How is she dealing with what she has to say about the governmental crisis?
Well, she wants to carry it to the end, I think, because she senses that the advantage is on her side. Mm-hmm. And the bourgeoisie, she was prosecuted, and in fact,
yes, I remember,
in a democratic manner. And as a result, she cannot run for the presidential election at this point. Mm. One way out for her is to bring down the government, force Macron to call new elections, parliamentary elections, so that she can get a majority, so that she can have an amnesty voted for her, right, so that she can run for president and indeed be elected soon after. So I think that's basically what they did.
And you mentioned this. You mentioned the Republican front, that they're now against Melenchon and with basically Le Pen, if I understood that correctly. Yes?
Well, in a way, yes, that's the way it is. On the other hand, if there are new elections, Melenchon is going to most probably to play the same role that he played last year. Mm-hmm. And that quite a number of people, in fact, that we talked to in demos, they are quite aware of this. Last year, everybody hated Hollande, as Sacramento said earlier. He basically got a new lease on life too, thanks to Melenchon, because Melenchon agreed to this new popular front, together with the CP and SP and Greens, which allowed such people as Hollande to get re-elected or newly elected as members of parliament and so on. And the SP itself doubled its number of votes thanks to the Mélenchon-led Popular Front of last year.
So Mélenchon really did a service to these more rotten elements.
Definitely.
Yeah. I have a question, which is why? Well, I guess my first question is, what's the general attitude of the organizations to the left of the LFI? What's their sort of approach to Melenchon and the LFI? What kind of criticisms do they make, and do they draw these lessons, for example, from the New Popular Front? I ask this because the New Popular Front was really a big deal and seen as a model for some other countries. As diverse, the people talk about, like the Social Democrats here in Britain talk about it with respect to, their vision of how this new party with Jeremy Corbyn should be. There's an entirely different world. In India, people see the New Popular Front as a way to fight the right and the fascists and so on and so forth. Yeah. So what sort of lessons has the French left drawn from this experience of Melenchon and the New Popular Front?
Well, I'm sorry, but they have drawn zero lesson. And in fact, if Macron suddenly calls on new elections, basically everybody's going to have to figure out they have carried out no discussion of last year's fiasco and the inability of the left to present a broad workers' bloc that would be opposed to Mélenchon and the new Popular Front. We are probably going to have some kind of repeat of what happened last year at this point. And so they of course, you can have individual criticisms of Mélenchon on this or that aspect, but at bottom they end up allowing Mélenchon to play the role that he's been playing.
They can criticize Mélenchon because he's entire perspective is through the institutions of the republic, etc.
Elections,
through elections, etc. But when he takes on these radical positions, we have to block the economy, or we have to defend the banlieue, or
demote Macron.
The far left is completely disarmed. So now they present indeed the same program as Melenchon. They have all these criticisms, but there was a tweet recently. I don't know who wrote it, but it was Revolution Permanente criticizing Melenchon. He's too moderate. He wants the general strike only to impose the Sixth Republic. Melenchon calls for the Sixth Republic. Revolution Permanente calls to put an end to the Fifth. And Lambertiste, another Trotskyist group, they say exactly the same thing. We have to put an end to the Fifth Republic. So it's impossible to distinguish the far left from La France Insoumise in reality.
So why should youth look to these tiny little groups that are split in, I don't know how many dozen, various Trotskyist groups, and not rather join the France Insoumise, which is a lot bigger, a lot more visible, and obviously more capable of carrying out the same program?
Yeah, I think on that last point, that makes sense, because this is, again, something we see. Why should I go with this group with 100 members when I can go for the real deal, when there's really no difference? I think that makes sense. But the thing about the Fifth and the Fourth and the Sixth Republics is something that I have a hard time with when it comes to French republics, because what's the substance of this republic? When Melenchon says, I want a Sixth Republic, what does that mean? Or when the far left says end to the Fifth Republic, all right, but in favor of what? What exactly is the political content or the class content, I guess, of these things?
Well, maybe one of the more articulate groups on this question maybe is Revolution Permanente. Basically, they have 2 points. They want to abolish the presidency as such, no president anymore, I suppose, just the prime minister. And second, to abolish the Senate, because there are 2 chambers in France, and that allows, of course, the more conservative forces to mitigate or impede, problems when there's a left-wing majority in parliament. So basically, that's what Revolution Permanente proposes, to abolish these 2 features of the current French constitution, which are indeed undemocratic. The French president has a lot of power. He can also declare a state of war. He can dissolve the parliament. He can do a bunch of things like that. He has more powers than many other presidents in many bourgeois countries. And obviously, we are also opposed to the Senate, which is also undemocratic. But so basically, what Revolution Permanente is proposing is a democratic revolution, which means they have been calling for a general strike and so on. So a huge mobilization of the working class in order to achieve what? Only some democratic measures.
I see. So, since you've been talking about RP, Revolution Permanente, let's talk a little bit more in detail about the recent leaflet you have just published, which is explicit polemic against the RP, but also the NPA. Could you start by explaining what the title of this leaflet is? Tell our listeners what it's called in French, and then explain to us what it is, what it means.
Yeah, well, the title, the first part, I think it comes from Dante, the divine comet, but it's an expression both in Mexico and Mexican, but also in France. The seventh heaven, you're really in paradise, in glory.
Yeah.
You think now it's the time for Soviets, for revolution, or at least a remake of May 1968.
All right.
While the workers, they're really under attack. It means the 30th
underground level,
sub-basement.
Right. This is Dante's Inferno, the 36th level in Dante's Inferno. So the left is on the 7th heaven of the Soviets in 68, but the workers are in Dante's Inferno.
Yeah.
I see. Okay. That's quite funny, I think.
And the point is to fill the gap between
Okay,
the two.
so we must bridge the gap. Yeah.
Just calling for to go on the offensive, it adds to the discredit of the extreme of the far left.
Mm-hmm.
I think of the Trotskyist left. I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, they look like people like think, okay, they okay, they are a little crazy, but that's they're sympathetic. I mean, that's nice, they're nice people, but they just out of their minds about what's really going on, kind of. So
yeah. We wrote here in Workers' Hammer an article some time ago called British Left and La La Land, or Cuckoo La La Land.
Right.
But it's somewhat similar, saying really nice things, which, one wouldn't object to in and of itself. But it's like, well, how do we get there? And I think that's really the problem we face is. And I guess this brings us to the point about the difference you have with these groups. This is RP and the NPR, which is this is not the time for a counteroffensive because they have not really understood the dynamics of the current situation. Yes?
Right. And in fact, the end result of this is that it's going to make the union bureaucrats with a program of betrayals, they look more realistic. Mm-hmm. More attentive to the little struggles that the workers defensive struggles that the workers carry out every day against new little attacks every day at work and so on. Mm-hmm. It makes the union bureaucrats a lot more down to earth and basically better responding to the needs of the workers than the far left. So when RP thinks they're going to bring the workers to the general strike, in fact, it rather reinforces the political authority of the bureaucrats who are the chief obstacle to such a general strike. So that's why we think it's counterproductive at this point.
So what is it that you propose that the French workers should do? Or how would you even convince RP to change course?
Well, what that means is that the unions are very small in France. It's significantly less than 10% of the workforce which is unionized, and moreover, the unions themselves in each place where there's a union. In fact, there's several unions, and they divide it that's the major problem at this point is that the working class is totally disorganized. They are like individuals, facing attacks instead of trying to stick together. There are all these multi-tier mechanisms to divide the working class, and we have to address this. Mm-hmm. And some of these victories are going to bring us a bit further to rebuild the unions and put us in a better position to look for the moment when we will have a counter-offensive. Mm-hmm. So that's the way. And in fact, some of these leftists, I would say, obscurely, they know there's something to this, including, when was that? A week ago, RP had a big forum, and so they had like dozens of youth, chanting general strike and so let's block everything, and then they have their people active in unions who make reports about the situation and so on, and you realize they report themselves, in as much they report what's going on the workplace. It's a totally different picture there that appears. So there's a huge gap, including these militants. They need a certain level of schizophrenia to conciliate their obscure sensing of what's really going on and their bombastic calls for general offensive and general strike and block everything.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it's interesting because this is a question I have a difficult time with myself in terms of understanding the problems of the left, which is, Sacra, as you mentioned, the defeats of the last number of years. Why? What is the obstacle to the left understanding where the working class is at? What is preventing them from learning the lessons? Maybe it's like getting too psychological. I don't know. But I always have this question, like, what is the difficulty with groups like this in your understanding?
What is the difficulty? Frankly, I'm not sure, but it's, well, at least in part, it's also their refusal to break with liberalism and everything associated with that. For example, all these multi-tier schemes that Alexis just talked about, all these privatizations, all these closures of factories were mandated by the European Union, which is dominated by France, Germany, and the US after Brexit. Well, all these attacks were ordered by the European Union in the name of free, what do you call it?
Free market,
concurrence,
free competition,
ecology, the green ideology, and like that. And the left refuses to break with that. And the trade union bureaucracy not only refuses to break, they really support all that in the name of open the borders. But what is the open borders of the European Union? We're going to, the imperialists, the French, German, and American imperialists, we're going to destroy your economies of the poorer countries like Poland or Romania or Portugal, etc. In exchange, we're going to give you the right to come get the worst jobs in France and Germany and elsewhere. But so the left refuses to break with that, and workers hate that, and they are right in hating that, because that's what's destroyed the lives. And that also helps the bourgeoisie to pit one section of the working class against the other along national, ethnic, and religious lines. And other than that, the left always calls to go on the offensive. What we call in France la grève reconductible, an illimited strike.
Right.
Except there are no picket lines, there are no strike funds. Every time a railroad worker goes on strike, he loses about 100 euros of salary. If a railroad worker went on strike on the 10th, and then on the 18th, he already lost 200 euros. It's too much.
Yeah.
He's probably not going to do it again on the 2nd of October. And that's what happened. Even Revolution Permanente, we were at the Gare du Nord. It's the largest train hub in Europe. I think when they say that in Europe, they don't count Russia. They don't count Moscow. But in any way, I'm not sure. But in any case, and there was a so-called General Assembly called by Revolution Permanente. I counted 15 railroad workers, including our comrade and the comrades from Revolution Permanente. It was just a bunch of students and teachers. And they even Revolution Permanente realized this is pathetic. Right. And why? It's because the trade union bureaucracy, well, of course, the trade union bureaucracy sabotage.
Sorry.
Yeah.
All the struggles, But that's only half of the explanation. The other half is that we can't continue to struggle on the basis of the limits that the trade union bureaucracy itself imposes. And that's what they refuse to do, to build an opposition, a serious political, constant opposition to the trade union bureaucracy in order to replace it with a revolutionary leadership from the start. If you want to go to the offensive, we would love to go to the offensive, but you have to prepare it. You have to start by building an opposition to the trade union bureaucracy and preparing the future struggle.
Speaking of preparing future struggles, we have another organization, Lutte Ouvrière, which you speak about also in your leaflet, that they're different than AP, for example, because they do understand where the working class is at. And I think that's not a surprise. It's because they actually are quite interesting in that they have a sizable number of trade union cadre in their organization. So they understand that the situation is not good, but you still think that they have a problem as well. So what's your difference with the LO, and where is LO going wrong?
Well, they are kind of a mirror of the rest of the left. The rest of the left doesn't want to break with liberalism, and what makes it in part also difficult is that there is still a layer of radicalized liberal leftists, like Melenchonites, basically, and that's the RP and the NPR keep sucking up to. Hello. So as you said, because they have a much stronger basis among the working class, they are a lot more realistic about the real mood of the working class. So when the this call for the 10th of September happened, in fact, they were kind of very cautious, in fact, because they thought maybe it's going to be a general strike. So they did not advocate it. They didn't run around saying that's going to happen, but they were kind of disoriented a little bit. But at bottom, what they say in this situation is, okay, the situation is bad. One day there's going to be a revolution, and we have to keep hammering to the working class. The working class at this point, they cannot carry out a general strike, but then basically they have to wait for the revolution. But the revolution is not going to happen if we do not bring the workers forward, in their daily struggles. And what LO ends up doing is basically not so different from RP or others, which means that they do not want to break with the trade union bureaucracy. And they say, well, it's not on the agenda now. And one day when the revolution finally comes, then anyway, there's going to be such a huge working class upsurge that they're going to throw aside the bureaucrats, and it's not going to be a matter. But both, they have, in some ways, they look opposite, but in reality, both of them have the same problem, that they do not see as their central task to make workers and radicalized youth break with Melenchonism, break with the union bureaucracy. Mm-hmm. They really don't like it that we keep hammering on this. The NPAR thinks we're obsessed with Melenchon.
Okay. I mean, obsessed or not, but he seems to be the main thing that the far left, if it wants to be successful, right, then it has to try and expose what's wrong with Melenchon's program. And that's not called being obsessed. I think that's dealing with the obstacle.
Exactly.
That's interesting. So it seems that ultimately these different groups, they share the same problem, and that there is a huge gap between, even though, as you said, LO recognizes where things are, but they're not actually trying to connect the current state of the working class to how to move forward. Then they just go into an abstraction about the seventh heaven that's good. That's going to come somehow automatically.
RP seventh heaven is now, with the 10th September general strike, and seventh heaven is going to be sometime in the future.
Yeah. I think this is interesting. In this period, generally, as an international tendency, one of our tasks we see for ourselves is to really try and put forward bases for regrouping the left, to really clarify why do all these different groups exist separately, right? It's not because of whether the revolution is now or later, but really what is your task right now? And I think the task is, in France anyways, to expose Mélenchon, to push the struggle forward outside the bounds of Mélenchonism. But also to rebuild the strength of the labor movement, to do the preparatory work so that the trade unions can actually be the vanguard of the protests that seem to be erupting time and time again, but then go nowhere. Come back to the protests. So you mentioned at the start that there's other struggles on the horizon. Is there other stuff that's coming up?
No, at this point, no. Basically, there was first this call on the 10th of September, which was taken up by Melenchon and part of the union bureaucracy. Then the union bureaucracy called for another day of action on the 18th of September, which was more significant in terms of strike, I would say. And then the union bureaucrats called for the 2nd of October. That was this week. And now the movement started going down pretty massively. There was basically no visible strike, around Paris, for example, in public transport, whereas it was kind of significant 2 weeks ago. So at this point, the union bureaucrats have called for nothing. And so the far left will have to confront, to get back down to earth at some point. Now, it doesn't look like they really want to examine how they got there, because they look. For Revolution Permanente, I'm just coming back from a demo in Palestine. That happened just now. In fact, it was rather small, I would say, but they've switched from a general strike to bring down Macron to a general strike for Palestine. So when this withers away too, they will have a hard landing. The problem is that they're going to have demoralized a bunch of youth who got radical and so on. And when the general strike doesn't happen, what are they going to do? They're going to drop out of leftist politics, some of them. So be a big loss.
Do you really think, the last episode I did was with Comrade Mauro from Italy. In Italy, we see this momentum growing. There was first 1 million people, and now apparently, according to the trade union bureaucracy, there's 2 million workers yesterday, or not workers, but 2 million people on the street. That seems to have inspired a little bit of an uptick in many countries. I think in Greece there's going to be something similar. I'm not so sure, but I was wondering, is something similar? I mean, you mentioned there's a prospect of a general strike for Palestine, but you don't seem very convinced by it. What's the reason for your skepticism?
Well, in part because of the general dynamics of the situation, they are not going to be reversed at this point by the situation in Palestine. Although, of course, a lot of workers and the minorities have a huge sympathy for Palestine. But the other aspect is that half of the working class looks rather to Le Pen, who is very hostile to Palestine. Of course, they even. I think they're even worse than Macron. They're posturing as, the anti-Semites and stuff like that. So we have to deal with these obstacles. Yeah, and the demo today, there was a demo on Thursday. There was one today. There were less than 10,000 people in Paris, and Paris is I suppose it's the biggest. If you take Greater Paris, it's the biggest Arabic city in Europe, I suppose, or one of the biggest. It's very small, in fact.
Yeah, especially, this is, this coming week is the 2-year anniversary.
Right, yeah.
So that's quite something, actually. It's not a good sign.
Right. Also, one thing I think one difference between Italy and France is that they have had the far right in the government, Meloni,
right. Yes, that's
for
true.
2 or 3 years. Whereas here, we're going to get it just very soon. Workers have experienced already of this anti-system, right in Italy. Here, not yet.
Yes, I think that's a good point to make in terms of the difference between the two countries. Okay, I think that about ends it for me in terms of the questions I had about understanding the situation in France. Is there anything you'd like to say to our listeners about France, what to do next, where to go forward before we wrap this up?
Well, I don't know.
Summarize everything in one sentence.
Difficult, yeah. I think there's for those who listen to can listen to French. There's a very good talk in French by Vincent and Gab.
That's true. Yes,
we had a forum. I think it's also on this week. It's also on online if people want to listen to it.
Yes.
And in general, I think we're calling on the working class and the left to get more sober and draw a balance sheet of this crazy enthusiasm that's not going to bring us forward. We have to it's the situation. It's not good, but it does not help to just se voiler la face, as they say. To just deny reality.
Right.
So,
thank you for mentioning the talk by Vincent and Gabriel. So for our listeners who don't know and who understand French, francophones, there's another podcast by the Spartacists. It's called Comrades and Tabarnak, which is a Quebecois expression. You can go listen to them explain it. But they have an episode precisely on the situation in France. And directed I think specifically against Alpes, which is called Allô, la terre appelle.
Right.
I think I'm pronouncing that right, which is hello, the earth is calling, which is similar, like come down to earth, which again, I think will help make sense of some of the problems of the French left. And yeah, I'll link that as well as your recent forum in the show notes.
Okay.
And yeah, to our listeners, you can follow Comrades in France on X and Instagram. I'll link that as well in the show notes. And thank you, Comrades, so much for coming to explain to us what's happening on the ground in France.
Good.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.